In a penthouse overlooking the city, a billionaire made a bet that would destroy everything he built. The crystal champagne glasses caught the light from the floor-to-ceiling windows as Darian Mwangi raised his Dom Perignon toward the glittering skyline below. 30 floors above the streets of Lagos, his private celebration pulsed with the energy of conquest. The latest acquisition, a media conglomerate worth 2 billion naira, had closed that afternoon, and his inner circle of wealthy associates lounged across Italian leather furniture, their laughter echoing off marble walls adorned with original Picassos. "To the king of corporate Africa," shouted Marcus Okafor, his oldest friend and fellow titan of industry. The room erupted in cheers as Darian's trademark smirk spread across his face, the same expression that had intimidated boardrooms across 3 continents. Darian's penthouse was a monument to excess. Hand-carved mahogany dominated the space, while Persian rugs worth more than most people's homes stretched beneath their feet. The walls displayed awards, newspaper headlines celebrating his meteoric rise, and photographs of him shaking hands with presidents and prime ministers. Every detail screamed one message: "I am untouchable." Have you ever been underestimated by someone who thought they had all the power? "You know what I love most about success?" Darian said, swirling his champagne as he gazed out at the city lights below. "It's watching people realize they can't touch you. Money isn't just wealth, it's control. It's the ability to bend anyone to your will." His friends nodded, accustomed to these philosophical moments when Darian's ego reached its peak. But tonight felt different. Tonight, there was something almost predatory in his confidence. "Speaking of bending people," interjected Folake Adebayo, the oil heiress whose own ruthless business tactics had earned her a spot in this exclusive circle. "How's the lovely Leona? Still playing the perfect girlfriend?" The mention of Leona Adeyemi shifted the energy in the room. For 6 months, she'd been seen on Darian's arm at every high society event, elegant, composed, and seemingly devoted. To most observers, she appeared to be exactly what a man of Darian's stature deserved: beautiful, refined, and completely under his influence. "Leona," Darian chuckled, his voice taking on a darker tone. "She's interesting. Quiet strength, they call it. Community advocacy work, charity galas, all very noble." He paused, taking another sip. "But there's something about her that feels resistant, like she thinks she can maintain some independence." The room grew quiet, sensing where this conversation was heading. "You sound like you've met your match," Marcus said carefully. Darian's laugh was sharp as broken glass. "My match? Do you know who you're talking to?" He stood, his 6-foot frame casting a shadow across the room. "I built this empire from nothing. I've crushed competitors who thought they were untouchable. I've made grown men beg for mercy in boardrooms." He walked to the window, his reflection ghost-like against the city lights. "No one, and I mean no one, has ever proven stronger than my will. Not business rivals, not government officials, not anyone." "So what are you saying?" Folake asked, though her tone suggested she already knew. Darian turned back to face his audience, his eyes gleaming with the thrill of a new challenge. "I'm saying that if Leona thinks she can maintain this quiet defiance, this subtle resistance to my influence, she's about to learn how wrong she is." The silence stretched like a taut wire. "In fact," Darian continued, his voice dropping to almost a whisper, "I'll make you all a wager. I bet I can break that quiet strength of hers. I bet I can prove that no matter how principled someone thinks they are, everyone has a breaking point, even her." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "Darian, she's your girlfriend. This sounds like reality," Darian cut him off. "Love, loyalty, principles, they're all just words until they're tested by real power. And I have more power than she's ever imagined." The bet hung in the air like a challenge to the universe itself. Here was a man so consumed by his own invincibility that he would gamble with the heart of the woman who trusted him. His friends exchanged glances, some impressed by his audacity, others quietly disturbed by the casual cruelty in his voice. "What exactly are you betting?" Folake asked. "Everything," Darian replied without hesitation. "My reputation, my pride, my certainty that wealth conquers all. I'm betting that within 6 months of marriage, yes, I'm going to propose next week, I can reduce Leona's independent spirit to complete submission. I can make her abandon every principle she holds dear." The room buzzed with nervous energy. This wasn't just arrogance. This was a declaration of war against the very soul of someone who loved him. As the night wore on and his guests eventually departed, Darian stood alone at his window, already planning his strategy. He saw Leona as his greatest conquest yet, a final proof that his philosophy was correct, that money and manipulation could overcome any resistance. Drop a comment if you believe karma is real, because what Darian didn't understand was that he wasn't the only one capable of strategy. Leona wasn't who she appeared to be. 3 weeks after the bet, Darian's proposal made headlines across Nigerian society pages. The emerald-cut diamond, 8 carats of flawless perfection, caught camera flashes at the exclusive Ikoyi Country Club as Leona said yes with tears in her eyes. To the world, it looked like a fairy tale. The self-made billionaire and his beloved, planning what would surely be the wedding of the decade. But fairy tales, like Darian's carefully constructed image, often hide darker truths. The Mwangi Empire stretched across mining operations in Ghana, textile factories in Bangladesh, and palm oil plantations in Indonesia. On paper, everything looked legitimate: impressive profit margins, regulatory compliance, glowing sustainability reports. The boardroom presentations were masterpieces of corporate storytelling, complete with charts showing job creation and economic development. The reality was far more brutal. In the cobalt mines of Ghana, workers labored 12-hour shifts without proper safety equipment, their wages barely enough to feed their families. The textile factories employed young women who hadn't seen a raise in 5 years, while productivity quotas increased relentlessly. The palm oil operations had displaced entire communities, leaving behind scorched earth where ancient forests once stood. Darian knew every detail of these operations. He'd personally approved the cost-cutting measures that eliminated safety protocols. He'd signed off on the wage freezes that kept workers trapped in poverty. When environmental groups tried to investigate the plantations, he'd hired private security firms with questionable reputations to keep them away. Business is war, he often told his executives. Sentiment is a luxury we can't afford. While Darian's empire extracted wealth from the vulnerable, Leona moved through Lagos's forgotten neighborhoods with quiet purpose. Every Tuesday, she volunteered at a clinic in Makoko, one of the city's largest slums. She didn't arrive with cameras or publicity teams, just medical supplies purchased with her own money and a genuine desire to help. She'd learned that many of the clinic's patients were former factory workers, injured in workplace accidents and then discarded by their employers. Some had lost fingers to unsafe machinery. Others suffered from respiratory diseases caused by poor ventilation. All had stories of being treated as expendable. On Thursdays, Leona taught literacy classes to domestic workers in Surulere. These women, many of them single mothers, shared stories of employers who withheld wages, demanded impossible hours, and threatened deportation for those from neighboring countries. Leona listened, documented, and quietly connected them with legal aid organizations. She never mentioned these activities in the society columns that breathlessly covered her relationship with Darian. To the media, she was simply the perfect billionaire's girlfriend, sophisticated, supportive, and appropriately grateful for her luxurious lifestyle. The wedding planning became a theater of deception on both sides. Darian threw money at every detail with calculated generosity. The venue, a private island resort in the Maldives, would cost more than most small nations' annual budgets. He hired celebrity wedding planners, flew in exotic flowers from Ecuador, and commissioned a custom Vera Wang gown. Each extravagant gesture was designed to overwhelm Leona with the sheer magnitude of his wealth, to make her feel small and dependent. "Nothing but the best for my bride," he would say, watching her face carefully for signs of submission. "I want the world to see how much you mean to me." Leona played her part perfectly. She smiled at the tastings for the 7-course menu. She nodded appreciatively at the orchestra rehearsals. She posed for engagement photos that would grace the covers of luxury magazines. But behind her gracious acceptance, she was conducting research of her own. Each vendor Darian hired was secretly investigated. The florist who imported rare orchids? His supply chain included farms that used child labor. The custom jewelry designer? Her gold came from mines linked to armed conflict. The luxury resort? built on land seized from indigenous communities without compensation. Every indulgent detail of their wedding was connected to someone's suffering, and Leona documented it all. What Darian didn't know was that his bride-to-be had spent the past year building a comprehensive dossier on his business empire. While he believed he was demonstrating his power, she was mapping the connections between his wealth and the pain she witnessed in Lagos's slums. The same workers who'd lost fingers in his textile factories were the patients she treated on Tuesdays. The environmental destruction from his palm oil operations was poisoning the water sources in communities where she taught literacy classes. The security firms he hired to silence critics had beaten activists she'd secretly funded. As the wedding invitations went out, gold-embossed announcements of their union, Leona was making final preparations of her own. She'd spent months building relationships with investigative journalists, human rights organizations, and regulatory officials. Her evidence was methodically organized, legally bulletproof, and ready for release. The perfect facade they both maintained was about to crumble, but only one of them knew it. Bookmark. The Maldivian sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson as 300 of the world's elite gathered on a private island that Darian had rented for an entire week. Crystal chandeliers hung from silk pavilions, their light dancing across tables laden with white orchids and champagne fountains. The sound of a full orchestra, mixed with gentle waves, lapping against the pristine beach, creating a symphony of luxury that would be remembered for years. Leona walked down an aisle carpeted with rose petals imported from France, her Vera-Wang gown flowing like liquid silk behind her. The dress alone cost more than most people's homes, its intricate beadwork catching the light with each step. Darian waited at the altar, resplendent in his custom Savile Row tuxedo, his smile radiating triumph. He'd never felt more powerful. As Leona approached, Darian's inner circle exchanged knowing glances. Marcus whispered to Falake, 6 months from now, she'll be completely different. They remembered the bet, the wager that had started this elaborate game. To them, this wasn't just a wedding, it was the beginning of Darian's greatest victory. The ceremony itself was a masterpiece of excess. The officiant was a renowned philosopher flown in from Oxford. The rings were crafted from rare pink diamonds. Even the sand beneath their feet had been specially imported from Tahiti to achieve the perfect shade of white. Every detail screamed of money, power, and control. "Do you, Darian Wangi, take Leona to be your wife?" the officiant asked. "I do," Darian replied, his voice carrying across the water with absolute certainty. In his mind, he was claiming ownership, not pledging partnership. When Leona spoke her vows, her voice was steady and clear. "I promise to honor truth above all else, to stand for justice even when it's difficult, and to never compromise my principles for comfort." The words sounded romantic to the guests, but those who listened carefully might have detected something deeper, a declaration of war disguised as a wedding vow. The reception that followed was even more extravagant. Guests dined on dishes prepared by Michelin-starred chefs while acrobats performed overhead. The wedding cake was a 6-tier creation adorned with edible gold leaf. Champagne flowed like water, and the dancing continued until the early hours of morning. Darian held court like a king, regaling his guests with stories of his latest conquests. He spoke of markets dominated, competitors crushed, and deals that had made him hundreds of millions. His confidence was intoxicating, his charisma undeniable. He was a man at the absolute peak of his power, surrounded by wealth, influence, and a beautiful new wife who seemed completely devoted to him. "To the happy couple," toasted the governor of Lagos State, one of many powerful figures in attendance. "May your union be as strong as your success." Leona smiled graciously, playing the role of the grateful bride perfectly. She thanked guests for their kind words, posed for countless photographs, and danced with her new husband as cameras captured every moment. To everyone watching, she appeared radiant with happiness. But as the celebration wound down and the last guests departed via private jets and luxury yachts, Leona's demeanor subtly shifted. While the staff cleared away the remnants of the feast and Darian basked in the afterglow of his perfect evening, she quietly slipped away to their bridal suite. The room was a temple to romance. Candles flickered on every surface, rose petals covered the silk sheets, and floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the moonlit ocean. It was here, in this sanctuary of luxury, that the real wedding night would begin. From her suitcase, Leona carefully removed a worn leather journal. Its pages were thick with documents, photographs, financial records, and testimonies she'd collected over months of careful investigation. The journal felt heavy in her hands, not just from its physical weight, but from the magnitude of truth it contained. She placed it on the marble nightstand beside their bed, its dark leather contrasting sharply with the white silk and gold accents surrounding it. This simple book would soon transform their fairy tale wedding into something far more consequential. As Darian's footsteps approached the suite, Leona took a deep breath and prepared to show him who she really was. Darian entered the bridal suite with the swagger of a conqueror, loosening his bow tie as he surveyed the romantic scene before him. Candles cast dancing shadows across the silk-draped walls, and the sound of waves provided a gentle soundtrack to what he assumed would be the beginning of his complete victory over Leona's independence. "What a perfect night," he said, pouring himself a glass of champagne from the bottle chilling on ice. "Did you see how everyone looked at us? The power couple of the decade." His reflection in the mirror showed a man drunk on his own success, utterly convinced of his invincibility. Leona sat quietly on the edge of the bed, her wedding dress replaced by a simple white robe. The leather journal rested in her lap like a sleeping weapon, waiting for the right moment to awaken. "Darian," she said softly, her voice cutting through his self-congratulation. "Before we go any further as husband and wife, there's something I need to share with you." He turned, champagne glass in hand, his trademark smirk still firmly in place. "Share away, my dear, though I can't imagine what could be more important than celebrating our union." Leona opened the journal to the first page. "Do you remember the bet you made 3 weeks ago? About breaking my spirit, proving that everyone has a breaking point?" Darian's smile faltered slightly. He hadn't expected her to know about that private conversation. "I'm not sure what you're referring to." "Marcus recorded it," Leona interrupted, her tone remaining calm and measured. "The entire conversation where you wagered that you could reduce my independent spirit to complete submission within 6 months of marriage." She pulled out a small digital recorder and pressed play. Darian's own voice filled the room. "I bet I can break that quiet strength of hers. I bet I can prove that no matter how principled someone thinks they are, everyone has a breaking point, even her." The color drained from Darian's face as he heard his cruel words played back. The champagne glass trembled in his hand. "You bet you could break me," Leona continued, turning to the next section of her journal. "I accepted that challenge silently, but not in the way you expected." She held up the first document, a photograph of children working in a cobalt mine, their faces covered in dust, their eyes hollow with exhaustion. "These are workers at your Ghanaian mining operation. Some of them are 12 years old." Darian stepped forward. "Those are subcontractors. I don't directly." "You personally approved the cost-cutting measures that eliminated age verification," Leona cut him off, producing a signed document with his signature clearly visible. "Your CFO's email specifically mentions reducing overhead by relaxing hiring standards. Your signature is right here." She turned another page. More photographs emerged. Women in his textile factories working 18-hour shifts, sleeping on factory floors because they couldn't afford transportation home. "These are your employees in Bangladesh. The same women whose children I've been treating at the clinic in Makoko for malnutrition." Darian's confident posture began to crumble. "How did you get access to these internal documents?" "The same way you built your empire," Leona replied. "Through relationships. Except mine are built on trust, not fear." She showed him another section. "Bank records, payment authorizations, communication logs. While you were planning this wedding to demonstrate your power over me, I was building connections with your employees, your suppliers, your critics." The revelation hit him like a physical blow. This woman he'd dismissed as naive and controllable had been conducting her own investigation while he focused on breaking her spirit. "Every vendor you hired for our wedding has connections to your exploitative operations," Leona continued. her voice never rising above a conversational tone. The orchids came from farms using child labor. The gold in our rings was mined by workers paid less than $1 a day. Even this resort was built on land stolen from indigenous communities. She produced email chains showing Darian's knowledge of these connections, his deliberate choice to work with vendors who shared his disregard for human rights. Each document was another nail in the coffin of his carefully constructed image. "You thought you were demonstrating your wealth," Leona said, closing one section and opening another. "Instead, you were providing evidence of your crimes." Darian stumbled backward, his legs hitting the chair behind him. The champagne glass slipped from his nerveless fingers, shattering on the marble floor. This isn't, you can't." "I already have," Leona replied. She opened her phone and showed him a series of sent emails. "Copies of everything in this journal have been delivered to investigative journalists at The Guardian, BBC Africa, and CNN International. The Nigerian Anti-Corruption Commission received their package 3 hours ago. Human Rights Watch has been briefed. The International Criminal Court has been notified of potential violations." The room fell silent except for the sound of waves and Darian's labored breathing. His world, the empire he'd built through exploitation, the image he'd carefully crafted, the power he'd wielded so ruthlessly, was collapsing in real time. "Why?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. Leona stood, closing the journal with finality. "Because while you were planning to break me, you forgot something crucial. You can't break someone who's already found their purpose. My purpose isn't to submit to your will. It's to ensure that people like you can never hurt others the way you've hurt so many." She walked to the window, looking out at the ocean that had witnessed their fairy tale wedding just hours before. "You wanted to prove that money conquers all. Instead, you've proven that truth is more powerful than wealth, that justice eventually finds those who think they're untouchable." What would you do in Leona's position? Comment below. Darian sat in the chair, staring at the shattered champagne glass, finally understanding that he hadn't married a victim. He'd married his judge, jury, and executioner. The man who'd bet he could break anyone had just been broken himself. By sunrise, Darian's world was burning. The first news alert appeared on Bloomberg at 6:47 a.m. Maldivian time. Breaking. Explosive documents reveal child labor in Wangi Empire mining operations. Within minutes, the story had spread across every major news platform on the planet. CNN International led with grainy photographs of 12-year-old children hauling cobalt ore in Ghana, their faces clearly visible beside official Mwangi Industries safety reports claiming full regulatory compliance. The BBC Africa service ran a devastating exposé titled "Blood Gold: How a Billionaire's Wedding Revealed a Trail of Human Suffering." Social media exploded with hashtags. Mwangi files began trending globally as activists shared the leaked documents. Videos of workers in his textile factories went viral, showing women collapsing from exhaustion, while supervisors demanded higher productivity. Environmental groups posted satellite images of deforested land where his palm oil plantations had destroyed ancient ecosystems. Darian's phone buzzed incessantly with calls from his public relations team, his lawyers, and his business partners. Each conversation followed the same pattern: panic, denial, then desperate damage control attempts. "Sir, we need a statement immediately," his head of communications pleaded during a crackling international call. "The Guardian is running a front-page story tomorrow. The New York Times wants comment by noon." But what could he say? The documents were genuine. The photographs were real. His own signature appeared on dozens of cost-cutting authorizations that prioritized profits over human lives. The business consequences arrived with brutal efficiency. At 9 a.m. local time in London, Henderson and Associates, his primary investment banking partner, issued a terse statement. "Following recent revelations, we are immediately terminating our relationship with all Mwangi-affiliated entities." 20 billion naira in credit lines vanished with those 37 words. The European Union announced an emergency investigation into all imports from Mwangi operations. The United States Treasury Department froze assets pending a review of potential human trafficking violations. 3 African governments launched their own inquiries into mining concessions he'd purchased through questionable channels. His board of directors held an emergency video conference while Darian was still processing the magnitude of his exposure. By noon, 8 of his 12 board members had resigned. By evening, the remaining 4 had voted to remove him as chairman and CEO. The social consequences were equally swift and merciless. Marcus Okafor, his oldest friend and the man who'd toasted him just hours before, released a statement through his own public relations firm. "I am horrified by these revelations and categorically condemn any business practices that exploit vulnerable workers. I call for full accountability." Falake Adebayo, the oil heiress who'd been present for the original bet, went further. In an interview with Reuters, she claimed she'd always had concerns about Darian's methods and was relieved the truth has finally emerged. The governor of Lagos State, who'd offered congratulations at the wedding reception, now avoided all mention of their association. The philanthropic organizations that had honored Darian with humanitarian awards began quietly removing his name from their websites. Invitations to galas were rescinded, private club memberships were suspended. The social calendar that had once revolved around his presence now treated him like a contagious disease. The regulatory response was comprehensive and devastating. Nigeria's Economic and Financial Crimes Commission launched a formal investigation into tax evasion and money laundering. Ghana's Minerals Commission revoked his mining licenses, pending a full review of labor practices. The International Labor Organization opened proceedings to examine systematic violations of worker protection standards. Interpol issued a request for information regarding his use of private security firms to intimidate environmental activists. The International Criminal Court announced it was reviewing evidence of potential crimes against humanity in connection with forced displacement of indigenous communities. His legal team, the best money could buy, advised him that he faced potential criminal charges in 6 countries. Asset seizures were likely. Extradition requests were possible. By the end of their wedding day, Darian's net worth had dropped by an estimated 60%. Stock prices for his publicly traded companies collapsed. Credit ratings agencies downgraded his bonds to junk status. Insurance companies canceled policies, citing reputational risk exclusions. The Maldivian resort where they'd celebrated their union now felt like a prison. International arrest warrants made travel dangerous. His private jet was grounded pending investigations. Even his luxury yacht had been impounded by Maltese authorities. As night fell on their honeymoon island, Darian sat alone on the beach where he'd declared his love just 24 hours earlier. The waves that had provided romantic ambiance now sounded like whispers of judgment. The stars that had blessed their ceremony now seemed cold and distant. His empire, built over 20 years of ruthless ambition, was crumbling faster than he'd ever imagined possible. The man who'd bet he could break anyone had learned that some forces are too powerful to control. Truth, justice, and the courage of someone who refuses to stay silent. 2 years after their wedding night revelation, the world looked very different for both Darian and Leona. Darian's transformation began in the most unlikely place, a federal detention center in Abuja, where he awaited trial on corruption charges. Stripped of his wealth, his status, and his illusions, he was forced to confront the human cost of his actions for the first time. The man who'd once dismissed workers as expendable found himself sharing meals with people whose lives had been destroyed by corporate greed. His cellmate was a former environmental activist who'd been imprisoned for protesting illegal mining operations eerily similar to Darian's own. "You know what your problem was?" the activist said during one of their long conversations. "You thought power meant making others smaller. Real power comes from lifting people up." Those words haunted Darian through sleepless nights and endless legal proceedings. Slowly, painfully, he began to understand that his empire hadn't been built on brilliance. It had been constructed from the suffering of thousands of people whose names he'd never bothered to learn. Upon his release 18 months later, Darian faced a choice: disappear into obscurity or use his experience to make amends. He chose the harder path. Working with his remaining assets, most had been seized for victim compensation, Darian established the Workers' Justice Foundation. Unlike his previous charitable efforts, which had been public relations exercises, this work was personal and private. He visited the families of workers injured in his factories, personally delivering compensation checks and medical care. In Ghana, he funded schools for the children who'd been forced to work in his mines. In Bangladesh, he helped establish worker cooperatives that gave employees ownership stakes in their factories. The work was slow, difficult, and often thankless, but for the first time in his life, Darian felt genuinely useful. Meanwhile, Leona had become a global symbol of courage and integrity. The success of her investigation launched her into international prominence as an advocate for corporate accountability. She testified before congressional committees, addressed United Nations assemblies, and consulted with governments developing new human rights legislation. But her most meaningful work remained local. The clinic in Makoko expanded into a comprehensive community health center, funded by donations that poured in from supporters worldwide. The literacy programs in Surulere grew into vocational training centers that equipped domestic workers with marketable skills. Real change doesn't happen in boardrooms, Leona often said in her speeches. It happens when we choose to see the humanity in people others would rather ignore. Her wedding night revelations had triggered a cascade of accountability across the corporate world. Other brave employees, inspired by her example, began documenting and exposing exploitation in their own industries. The Truth Over Power movement, which started with her leaked documents, forced dozens of companies to improve their labor practices. Most importantly, she'd proven that one person's courage could create waves of change that reached far beyond their original intent. The communities that had suffered under Darian's empire began to heal and thrive. Former child laborers attended schools funded by the compensation settlements. Women who'd worked 18-hour shifts in textile factories now owned cooperative businesses that prioritized worker welfare. Environmental restoration projects were bringing life back to damaged ecosystems. In the villages where Darian's palm oil plantations had displaced indigenous communities, new sustainable farming initiatives were providing both economic opportunities and cultural preservation. The same people who'd once been driven from their ancestral lands were now teaching sustainable agriculture techniques to the next generation. 3 years after that fateful wedding night, Darian and Leona crossed paths at a workers' rights conference in Lagos. They were no longer husband and wife. Their marriage had been annulled as part of the legal proceedings, but they shared something deeper, a commitment to justice. "I spent my whole life trying to accumulate power," Darian said during their brief conversation. "I never realized that real power comes from giving it away." Leona nodded. "You thought you could break me because you didn't understand what I was built from. Principles aren't weaknesses to be exploited. They're foundations that can't be shaken." Their story became a modern parable, shared in business schools and ethics courses around the world. It demonstrated that no amount of wealth or influence could overcome the power of someone willing to stand for truth, regardless of personal cost. If this story touched your heart, it's because you recognize the choice we all face. Will we use whatever power we have to lift others up or to tear them down? Will we choose comfort over conscience or courage over conformity? Leona's example proved that authentic power isn't about controlling others. It's about having the strength to do what's right, even when it's difficult. It's about refusing to stay silent when silence enables suffering. Her legacy lives on in every person who chooses to speak truth to power, who documents injustice, who stands up for those who can't stand up for themselves. She showed the world that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to be broken. Subscribe for more stories of courage triumphing over arrogance, because these tales remind us that no matter how dark the world seems, there are always people willing to light a candle rather than curse the darkness. In a world that often rewards the loudest voices, Leona's quiet strength changed everything. And that's the most powerful truth of all.